Hello and welcome back to another episode of Gaming the System, the podcast where three intersectional feminists examine gaming and games through a feminist lens. I'm your host for today. I'm Jem and I'm here with my friends Alex and Matt. So before we get started, if you want to support us, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/gaming the system for some exclusive content, or you can send us a one-off donation via PayPal to our email address, wearegamingthesystem@gmail.com. Hello and welcome. Today we will be talking about an article that we recently read in the BBC News website entitled "Actors Demand Action Over Disgusting Explicit Video Game Scenes," and we thought that this was definitely in our wheelhouse, and so we wanted to have a chat about this from our feminist perspective and talk about whether this is an issue, why this is an issue, and how this can be resolved going forward. So just to sort of fill you in on the news article itself, the piece is about how voice actors within the video games industry are often finding that they're turning up to work and just being given a script on the day, which is probably 90% of the time fine, but occasionally they will be filming an explicit scene that's either very violent or very sexual or very sexually violent. And it's really about how comfortable or uncomfortable they feel in filming those scenes. A lot of the voice actors also do the motion capture scenes as well, so they're not only voicing the scenes, but they're also enacting the scenes sometimes. And it's an area that the games industry are lagging in when it comes when we compare it to Hollywood, for example. So back in 2017, we had the Me Too movement, and as a result of that, there were a lot of changes in Hollywood, and we've seen an increase in awareness of how these scenes can impact on the actors themselves, and a recognition that sometimes scenes can be filmed in more considerate and compassionate ways. So it's not about necessarily not doing those scenes or not filming this stuff or covering these intense topics, but it's about doing that in a way that respects the impact that it might have on the people taking part in those scenes. And it's not just the actors, it's also the film crew and the sound team and everyone through the whole system. There are people who have all sorts of things that they bring to the situation that may need to be considered mindfully and sensitively. So today I wanted to talk about this topic broadly in the games industry, and I think that it would be nice or interesting to just ask you guys what you think about whether games are different from movies and TV in respect to these graphically violent or sexual scenes.
I think coming from the perspective of the performers, it's completely different because it's in movie and film and physical media, everything's has to be incredibly physically coordinated. You need to have lighting, you need to have cameras, you need to have the sets. Whereas when it comes to most motion capture gaming stuff, they literally just have a stage they put you in the Velcro suit with the dots on, and they just get, oh, we need a bed, we'll just get a cardboard box out of the storage shed, and then you're going to be sexually assaulted on top of a cardboard box at 5 minutes notice. And that's an unacceptable thing to happen. There's room for workshopping things and improvising things, but that needs to be in partnership with the actors being seen as equal to the people creating them. And one of the good things about these stories I'm noticing is that unions are immediately stepping in these situations, which is what it needs. Because I remember the first time I did a course on how union organising worked, I asked what the end goal of unionising and unions are. Is there a point where a union goes, right, that's good, our work is done, it'll be fine from here? And they said that the job of the union is constant vigilance. They will need to be there with their finger on the pulse of, which is so unfair because it adds another entire job that workers need to do as well as their own job, because companies show that they will try and exploit in every place that they can. And so this is a place where it needs to be as simple as something bad happens to one worker, they take it to the union grinds everything to a halt and goes, okay, we're going to fix this now. Not something goes wrong, oh, we need to organise a union and then try and work it out. It needs to be the union is as strong as the studio at all times, so that they can come in and go, right, we don't care about your profits and your creativity, we care about the safety of our workers. And when the studio and the union are on an equal footing and work together, then everything could be fine. But what needs to happen to capitalism now is for the unions to have such a big impact that it changes the culture of the companies, because the companies need to go, oh, it's actually impossible for us to exploit them in the way that we want to. And so we're going to just, the companies will need to resign themselves to going, oh, well, that was the fun golden age of being able to do whatever we want with no consequences is over, because there are consequences. So that's the good side of these events at the moment. And yeah, so another thing is I've been watching, have you watched The Boys?
Yeah.
Amazon show. So as you know, that's some of the most extreme, like, kind of action and sexual stuff. And as time goes on, the extremeness of what can be done in film and TV is being pushed, which is good. But actors need to know what they're signing up for at the start. And it's not just the actors, because you might say to the actors, oh, we're going to be doing these extreme things. And the actors will go, yeah, that's great. But then you might have lighters, you might have camera operators, you might have people around the set who won't be comfortable with these things. And that's why, especially the extreme stuff needs to be fleshed out from the start. And that's something that unions can guarantee, because it needs to be changed from, oh, the directors and writers can do whatever they want throughout the course of the project. You go, no, you're not allowed to do that anymore. And then they'll kick up a fuss, but if the union holds their ground, then it will force them to do it the other way. And it all needs to be people first. And they're not, so it's good that this stuff is in the news, but they're not relying on the news to drum up public pressure. They don't need public pressure. They've got the union. So this and the other story I've been looking at are actually quite encouraging in that regard. But yeah, it's a strange new world.
When I think about the differences between film and TV and gaming as a kind of a consumer of both of those things, I suppose, obviously we've talked about this a lot on the pod before, about how film and TV is kind of more passive and gaming is a lot more active. And I think we have to consider, when we think about the levels of content that we're consuming, the active nature of gaming and the level of control. So when I think about I'm trying to think of the word, bits of games where I've had to experience sexual content or been involved in controlling a character that is either, actually involved in sexual content or having things happening to them and me as a player not being in control, and how that makes me feel. Because I think one of the examples I've talked about on the pod before comes from one of the later Tomb Raider games, Tomb Raider Angel of Darkness, where obviously Lara Croft is the character you control. You spend all your time kind of siding with Lara and getting emotionally invested in Lara as a character, and you have this ongoing relationship with Lara if you've been a long time fan of the games. And then they introduce this character, Curtis Trent, and when he's introduced, there's a cutscene which you can't skip. You know, in those days you couldn't skip cutscenes, but basically you watched, and Lara was basically sexually assaulted by the way that she was held against him, and his hand was taking her guns out of the holsters, but like touching her in a very sort of not okay way, and it did make me feel uncomfortable. And I think the interesting thing with games is that obviously there's that emotional element where this player that you've sunk all your time into controlling and kind of being in charge of is now in a situation where you can't get them out of what you're watching. So it makes you feel even more emotionally invested in like what's happening, whether it be good or bad. And then other times you've got situations where your character might come across sexualized content and you can choose to sort of essentially stay and see how it plays out, or you can move on. There are certainly situations within certain types of games like GTA or similar ones like that, where those sorts of situations come up, or you actually undertake certain acts and things in various different games, and it's the fact that you're controlling it. I mean, Matt, you'll know, you've just watched what's it called? Way Out, the kind of co-op game where you're put in some very intense emotional situations and you have to be the one to kind of progress the action and move it forward, and sometimes being in control of that puts a really heavy emotional weight on you. So in terms of being a consumer, I think gaming is far more involved emotionally, and that's important to remember when we come face to face with this kind of content, because it's having some autonomy over it. And I think that's a key difference between TV and film and games. I don't know if I'm making any sense. I'm rambling a lot, but it's just more involved, and I think that needs to be taken into consideration. But then, yeah, you've got to consider also the thinking behind those particular moments and the involvement of the people working on the game, which is what this article is all about, that level of awareness for those people, what they're getting involved in day to day. I think that the fact that it's so unknown is going to be really difficult for a lot of people, because it might be triggering. There might be situations where, it might be very difficult for them to work on certain scenes because of things that might have happened in their personal life. So there needs to be those protections. If there's going to be an environment that continues to allow people to work without knowing what they're going to be working on day to day, there needs to be the protections in place to make sure that people are able to work while feeling safe, and in an environment that is safe for them to be doing the things they're doing in, which I'm sure we'll get onto more in a second. But yeah, I've kind of moved into 2 points there. But yeah.
Yeah, another way that it's different in gaming is that it's a lot it's a lot cheaper logistically to do pretty much anything. Because if you're doing a speech at a rally in real life, you need to hire tons of extras, and they all need support and lighting and all that stuff. Whereas with gaming, you can literally decide, okay, we'll have this motion capture scene in front of a crowd of 10,000 people. And another problem, which is spread across all kind of media, is failing to respect the gravity of certain things, because there are places for stories about sexual assault and instances of sexual assault in art there, because art should be able to do anything. But the problem is when they're used as cheap shock things, or they're being used as male power fantasy things, such as in I imagine that Lara Croft thing is meant to, you're the gamer, you're meant to be identifying with the guard. And then that skews our like how we measure the seriousness of things. And yeah, that's something that really strikes me about it too.
So, yeah, you both raised a lot of really important issues there. And I think, so let's just break some of them down a little bit. So we have the Performing Arts Union, Equity, who is responsible for care of actors, voice actors, in-game actors, and across the board. So they are calling on the games industry to be more mindful of the voice actors when doing these kind of scenes, and also their rights in general. We know that there are some strikes happening at the moment with regards to voice acting and concerns over AI, and we will be discussing that later today. But for now, I just want to focus on this bit of it. But I think it's important to acknowledge that the wider debate about AI and the rights of actors is very important, because as we know from the Me Too movement, the power imbalance is where the problems lie. So if an actor feels unable to raise concerns about a scene because they feel that they're just going to get ditched, and an AI actor is going to be brought in, that means that people might be agreeing to things that they're not comfortable with, or feel co-opted into things that they're not comfortable with. So for this reason, and off the back of the Me Too movement, the Hollywood industry it's now basically standard over there to use intimacy coordinators, and their job is to work with the actors and the directors and everyone involved, really, to ensure that when scenes are filmed, they're done so in a sensitive way, that everyone is consenting, continually consenting to the way that the scenes develop, because as with any art form, changes happen in the moment. Scenes are moved around, things are changed, and it needs to be acknowledged that just because you signed up to do this kind of sex scene doesn't mean that you will necessarily agree to that kind of sex scene. So an intimacy coordinator is there to ensure that everyone is happy with how the situation is playing out. And they do things like, they might film a scene with the minimum amount of people in the room, so that you're not feeling like you've got an audience. And unfortunately, that attitude doesn't seem to have made it through to the games industry very much so far, with the exception of your favourite and mine, Baldur's Gate 3, where Larian Studios did have a number of intimacy coordinators on hand for various of the scenes throughout their cut scenes and their game design and their voice actors. And I think that is an example of how a games company can do it right, and it pays off for them. So I think one thing I'm quite interested in is why have the unions failed the games industry thus far? Why is it only now that Equity is stepping in and saying, we have these guidelines and you guys need to follow them? Because this feels like it's very late, and we talk a lot about how comparable the games industry is to Hollywood, and yet, Me Too happened in 2017, and here we are in 2024, and only one game that I could find, and I'm not saying that there aren't other games using intimacy coordinators, but I wasn't able to find any information about them. So why is that the case? Why do we think that it's taken so long?
It's hard to know.
I'm going to have to sit forward for this bit because this is something that has angered me lividly for the last 3 years since I only learnt exactly what a union is and what it does about 2.5 years ago. And then you go, Jesus Christ, this is the only reliable opportunity that young people have to change anything, because we get told our entire life you've got politics, you've got the news, you've got the courts, and you have kings and queens, and you have the ruling class and all that, and that's what we're taught. And then an entire generation of young people thought, okay, we want to change things, so we'll go into politics. And we took over one of the two main parties, and then we did everything we were told we're supposed to do, and then the other side colluded with the right wing of our side and exploited all their institutional power, cheated, and won. And now they have salted the earth behind them so that no socialist stuff will ever grow in politics ever again. And that has left people going, well, this is hopeless, what am I supposed to do? Whereas if we'd been told, if the first thing we were taught in British history is that we don't have the reason we have child labour laws is not because the companies thought, children should be having an education so they have a better life. It was because unions went, we can't have children working from the time they're 6. So all the good things that working class people and anyone who isn't part of the ruling class have that is good in life that they rely on has been made by unions. But that is completely redacted from any kind of school history that we get taught. And so we get to the point where I was sort of 28 going, Jesus Christ, unions are the only thing. And then you look at, there are so many unions already existing, especially in trade jobs like electricians and plumbers and all that sort of thing. There are tons of those. And the first big thing that I saw for that was the RMT, the train strikes. And they were going, wow, they're making really good points. They've got all these members. They're really working really hard. And you look and go, why haven't you been doing this for the last 30 years? Why are we having to go, holy shit, we've got to put this together now and make it work the way it's supposed to now? And it's one of those areas where the past generations have completely failed our generation. It was their job to take the improvements that unions in the past made and continue them, constant vigilance, and then you hand that system over to us. Whereas what they've gone is done, oh, by the way, unions are supposed to hold things accountable, not anything else. Bye. And so that is just as applicable in the gaming industry, is that the previous people failed us. And there comes a point where you have to go, it's just, we can't fail the generation after us. this is too important, and it's unfair that we're the ones who are having to not only build something new but undo what has been built in the absence of what the forced unions are supposed to be. And it's getting started now, which is good, but it's just devastating thinking all the people that have fallen prey to being exploited because of the failures of the people that came before us. So
I wonder if it
that really plays into my anger about it.
No, it's hard to say, isn't it, really, what the root cause is. But I think Matt's had a fair stab at it, for sure. I definitely think that there's something in the culture of the industry as a whole that perhaps leads to these barriers being put up in terms of like awareness and understanding of everyone within the industry and the need to make sure that people are actually, their well-being is being looked after, and like just basic, like not being crappy to other people and understanding, just how those sorts of things work. But it's definitely, obviously, there's the stereotype from people looking into the gaming industry from outside that it's heavily male dominated, and that comes with a certain type of culture. We've talked before on the pod about so many barriers that women in the gaming industry face, with sexual harassment from their colleagues and all that sort of thing. So I think there's definitely probably something in the culture of the industry that's saying, well, let's just push all this under the carpet and not talk about it because it's easier that way. Or perhaps for the women in the industry just to feel like their voices, no matter how much they make a fuss, are not going to get heard, and nothing is going to happen in the long term that's actually going to be meaningful. They'll get the apologies. They might not even get any apologies. They might even get fired or moved on to other projects or, kicked out, because that's usually, you hear of all sorts from Gamergate and things like that. Sorry, I've lost my thread. There's definitely a cultural problem, I think, but it's hard to say whether that same problem was also taking root in film and TV and whether that's been overturned and why that has. Because gaming's a huge industry. We know, we've already discussed how big it is and how much more influence it's having over the last couple of decades, by moving into film and TV with lots of gaming adaptations there. But I think generally the whole structure of the industry in the way it employs people is perhaps, again, completely not an expert here, but I don't know how different that is to film and TV and whether that has an impact. Yeah, it's an interesting thought.
I think there's a tendency for people to assume that games aren't as serious or as impactful as movies because they're something that you play. I'm not going to go into all the things that we've talked about before about how that actually can make them more powerful and more impactful, but I think a lot of people feel that they're just a fun thing and therefore they're not taken as seriously, and so that the acting that people do, the voice actors and the motion caption actors, are not necessarily recognised as being actual actors. And I think sometimes people are quite shocked, like, oh, this person is also an actor as well as a voice actor for games. They also act on the stage or in TV shows or wherever, and I think people are a little bit sort of surprised by that, and I think that therefore they've perhaps slipped between the cracks a little bit when it comes to ensuring their rights. I think that the point you made, Alex, about it being such a male-dominated area and that being a factor in the way that people look at these things and the way that people consider these things. And we've often talked about how important it is to have women in the decision-making processes for all of these things. It's important to have diversity in the decision-making process, because that's where these issues get flagged up. That's where these concerns can be flagged up, and somebody can say, oh, but have you thought about it from this? Because I have had this life experience, or I know somebody who's had this life experience, and we don't seem to have a lot of that in the games industry, unfortunately. We've seen there's been talk about a Gamergate 2.0, which I think is overselling it, to be fair, but it's regarding the Sweet Baby Inc., which is a company that is being brought in by some games to look at the diversity within the games and to discuss ways that they can make a game more diverse or more sensitive or whatever. And I feel like they're doing sort of the intellectual side of the intimacy coordinator, not saying that intimacy coordinators are not intellectual, but the sort of design side as opposed to the practical side. And they're getting a lot of flack for that. There's a lot of pushback against that. So it feels that the games industry is just a little bit immature when it comes to these topics. Like, they just can't get their head around how necessary it is.
We hope you enjoyed that episode of Gaming the System. If you want to support us, you can donate to us through our PayPal by sending it to wearegamingthesystem@gmail.com if you want to send us a one-off donation. If you want to donate to us monthly, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/gamingthesystem. Until next time, bye-bye.